Welcome to my presentation on logic. I hope you enjoy. To start with, I feel it's important to understand the different types of reasoning. There are two main types used in the discipline of logic, and they are deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is an inferential process that supports a conclusion with certainty. Inductive reasoning is an inferential process providing support strong enough to offer a high probability but not absolute certainty for the conclusion. The attributes of a deductive argument are soundness and validity, and I will define those further, starting with validity. Validity is the attribute of deductive arguments that denotes logical strength. Validity is about the strength of the inference or reasoning between the premises and the conclusion. A deductive argument is valid when you have the following. If all its premises were true, then its conclusion must be true, by necessity. To determine if an argument is valid or invalid, not valid, first assume that the premises are true, even if they are not. Pretend that they are true, then ask yourself whether the conclusion would need to be true, assuming or pretending that the premises are true. Here's an example. Premise 1. All dogs are snakes. Premise 2. All snakes are birds. Conclusion. All dogs are birds. This is illogical or unsound, since the premises are obviously not true. But this is a valid argument regardless, because if all the premises were true, then the conclusion would follow by necessity. The argument therefore has logical strength or validity. Validity is about the form of the argument, not the truth of its premises. Valid arguments may have true premises and a true conclusion, or false premises and a false conclusion, or false premises and a true conclusion. But valid arguments can never have true premises and a false conclusion. In a valid deductive argument, if the premises are true, it is impossible for the conclusion to be false. It is important to keep in mind that just because an argument does have a possibly valid combination of premise-conclusion truth values, for example, true premises and true conclusions, it is not necessarily valid. It must also be logically strong. That example with dogs, snakes, and birds is valid because the true reasoning works. If those premises were true, the conclusion would necessarily follow. Even if the premises are true and the conclusion is true, it does not mean that the reasoning is valid. Here's an example of an argument with a true premise and a true conclusion, but the strength of the connection, the reasoning, from the premises to the conclusion is not valid. The conclusion happens to be true, but not due to any reason provided by those premises. The argument form is invalid, a formal logical fallacy. Premise 1. All dogs are mammals. Premise 2. All collies are mammals. Conclusion. All collies are dogs. This is a categorical syllogism and commits the fallacy of illicit minor, because the minor term is undistributed in the minor premise, but is distributed in the conclusion, as is easy to show by changing the variables. Premise 1. All platypus are mammals. Premise 2. All dogs are mammals. Conclusion. All dogs are platypuses then. Which is why it's important to learn about fallacies. But to summarize, a valid deductive argument is one where it would be impossible for the conclusion to be false, given that the premises were true. The conclusion follows necessarily from the logical connections or reasoning established by the premises. And now on to soundness. Soundness is the attribute of a deductive argument that denotes both the truth of its premises and its logical strength. A deductive argument is sound when it is valid and it has all true premises. For example, premise 1, all cats are mammals. Premise 2, all mammals are animals. Conclusion, all cats are animals. This argument is sound because 1, it is valid, the premises support the conclusion by necessity, and 2, all of the premises are actually true. On the other hand, the example used before to demonstrate validity with dogs, snakes, and birds is not sound, because it does not have all or actually any true premises, but its form is still valid. Sound arguments are rare in today's world, but we must still strive for soundness to remain reasonable. Moving on from deductive arguments to inductive arguments. There are two main attributes of inductive arguments: inductive strength and cogency. Inductive strength is the attribute of inductive arguments that denotes logical strength. An inductive argument is inductively strong when you have the following. If all its premises were true, then it is highly likely or probable that the conclusion would also be true. Strong and weak are the terms used to describe the possibility for the logical strength of inductive arguments. To determine if an argument is strong or weak, first assume that the premises are true, even if they are not. Pretend for now that they are true. Then ask yourself whether it is likely or probable that the conclusion would be true, assuming or pretending that those premises are true. Here's an example. Premise 1. Most peacocks eat oatmeal for breakfast. Premise 2. This bird is a peacock. Conclusion. Therefore, probably this bird eats oatmeal for breakfast. This argument is inductively strong, because if all its premises were true, then it would be highly likely or probable that its conclusion would also be true. Inductively strong arguments may have true premises and a true conclusion, or false premises and a false conclusion, or false premises and a true conclusion. Inductively strong arguments cannot have true premises and a false conclusion. To summarize, a strong inductive argument is one where it is improbable for the conclusion to be false, given that the premises are true. A weak inductive argument is one where the conclusion probably would not follow from the premises if they were true. So we should strive to make strong inductive arguments, not weak arguments. On to cogency. Cogency is the attribute of inductive arguments that denotes the truth of its premises and its logical strength. An inductive argument is cogent when it is inductively strong and has all true premises. In this way, it mirrors soundness from earlier. On the other hand, the example from before concerning peacocks used to demonstrate inductive strength is not cogent, because it does not have all true premises. Here's another flawed example from Lumen Learning where they tried to make a cogent argument, but fail. Premise 1. Europa, a moon of Jupiter, has an atmosphere containing oxygen. Premise 2. Oxygen is required for life. Conclusion. Thus there may be life on Europa. This argument is far from cogent, yet the assumptions of the author made him assume it is. This argument is inductively strong if we assume it is all true. However, it is far from cogent, since premise 1 assumes Europa has an atmosphere containing oxygen, when that is unverifiable, so not a true premise. And premise 2 assumes oxygen is required for life, when actually there are many forms of life that don't require it. It is only most living things that do. So the conclusion is uncogent, showcasing how hard it is to make sound or cogent arguments. So let me try. Premise 1. Refraction causes chromatic aberration from collimated light, or sunlight. Premise 2. We don't see the expected chromatic aberration in long-range images that violate globe Earth geometry. Conclusion. Refraction is most likely not causing us to see beyond any curves. This argument is cogent because 1. It is inductively strong. If the premises were true, then the conclusion would probably be true. And 2. These premises are actually true, so the conclusion is actually true. In summary, an inductive argument is one in which it is improbable that the conclusion is false, given that the premises are true. In closing, good arguments. The important takeaway from the information on the attributes of both deductive and inductive arguments is this. A good argument proves or establishes its conclusion and has two key features. It is logically strong, and all of its premises are true. Logical strength is the degree of support that the premises, if true, confer on the conclusion. This attribute applies to both deductive arguments by virtue of validity and inductive arguments by virtue of inductive strength. A good deductive argument is not only valid but also sound. A good inductive argument is not only inductively strong but also cogent. A sound deductive argument is always stronger than a cogent inductive argument. So we strive to be sound if we can, and when we can't, be cogent. That concludes the first part of my little logic course. I hope you enjoyed this, and I highly recommend the following course on fallacies. Until then, goodbye.